Evening, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, Teacher Certification class. Please be seated if you're standing here. Welcome those who are watching online, various places throughout the United States and the world. Welcome back to another class. As we continue in the advanced series of the book Building Moral Excellence, the character unit in this book. And hopefully you've been following along. We encourage you, if you haven't, occasionally you'll hear us tell you, you can always download the book. The PDF is available on the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page, if you're joining us on Facebook. And up in the More tab there, it's a little bit different on the desktop than it is on the mobile version, but nonetheless, it is still available where you can download the latest book that we're covering, which is the Building Moral Excellence right now. But bonus, in case you're just joining us for the first time, all the other previous intermediate books, 5 of those, are also available for download as well, so you can kind of get caught up to speed in the last 3 years of what we've been covering. So we are going to be picking up where Chris left off last time. We're on page 26, and we're still in chapter 1. There's quite a bit of chapter 1 in the advanced series here, and we are covering the negative traits. So we're still talking about Character My Foundation, and so we're seeing a little bit of the difference between the positive character traits that were covered in the previous lessons as we're working through the building blocks, and now we're looking at the negative character traits. And like Chris said last time, this is not something that we're wanting to focus on. As teachers, we want to help our students to understand, hey, listen, these are the things that make up and identify to you what is a negative character trait. Now, as we always talk about in the Peaceful Solution, the goal is to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. But in order to eliminate the negative, you have to know what the negative is. So this is why we educate and point these things out so that our students are aware of these things when they might see these traits possibly crop up within their own lives, or if they recognize them in others, then they can be aware. Before we get started, let's go back to the procedures page. Now, Chris covered this last time. I just want a refresher for everybody who's just joining us, and it's been a couple days, so let's refresh our memories on this. He was in Procedure 5, and we are still in Procedure 5 with what we're going to be covering this evening. It says there on page Lesson Plan 1, page J, it says, have the class turn to the section entitled Negative Character Traits found on page 25. Students can compare their list of negative traits as recorded on the board with this chart, which is an activity they could do. Have students complete the scenarios on pages 26 through 27, which we're going to be going through this evening with a little bit extra. They can do this individually, or they can be dramatized. Now, in schools nowadays, there's already a lot of drama going on, so you might not want to do that. But if you have some creative students that, kind of like, and this is an opportunity now, we've done this many times when we've gone to do presentations at school. We'll get the students involved. Usually there's a few who are ready, rip-roaring and ready to get out of their seats because they get a little bit antsy when they're sitting down in either the assembly or their classes or whatever they were doing prior to coming to our presentation. So you'll get a few volunteers, and you can get them to act it out, dramatize it or act it out, so that it's a more interactive activity. And it'll solidify that point that's being made in the minds of those who are viewing as well, even though they're not participating in the dramatization, but they're seeing it, they're seeing their classmate, they're hearing the lesson presented, hearing the outcome, hearing the point of the lesson and the principles that are being presented and so forth. So it's a little bit more realistic to them, and it's also enjoyable, a little bit funny too. Sometimes there's a little goofing off, but you can make it a very enjoyable activity for the students. And as teachers, we should want to make learning enjoyable to our students, especially when you get into younger people. Now with adults, you can do this as well. If you're going through this type of a class with adults, it might be, you might have to, pull a little bit harder, to try to get them to participate in certain types of things. But kind of gauge it and see what your students are willing to do and what will make the class enjoyable for the purpose, not just fun, but enjoyable for the purpose of driving the lesson deeper in the minds of the student. And then it says, remind students that having these traits as part of their character can result in hurt feelings, poor communication, and physical aggression, which is the negative character traits that Chris started to cover, or did cover last class. And we're going to, with these scenarios, we're only going to look at like three of the traits, the negative character traits. And if you have an opportunity, you can go back on page 25 and just reread, refamiliarize yourself with the different character traits that are there, negative character traits, which are a contrast to obviously the positive character traits that are found on page 20 there. All right, so let's look at page 26. It says, take a closer look at the following traits, then read the scenarios that follow. Explain how, if no one intervenes, right, if no one gets involved with fixing the problem, when the display of these negative traits take place, each negative trait could lead to disaster. Any of them. Now, of course, we're only covering 3 of them here this evening, but go back on page 25 and look at all of these different negative character traits, and you can probably think of 100 different scenarios where, if there's no intervention, either from the person displaying the trait or from someone outside or someone else, maybe an intermediate or a mediator like a teacher or a parent or a counselor or something like that, someone like that, if no one intervenes, it could potentially lead to a disaster, at the very least, a much worse situation. Number 1 here, we're going to look at unforgiving and revengeful. Unforgiving and revengeful. And it says here, an unforgiving attitude causes the person to focus on emotional pain that results from real or imagined wrong. Now, you remember what we covered in dealing with disrespect in the disrespect manual unit number 4 of the intermediate series, and we talked about the different types of disrespect. You have real, imagined, intentional, and unintentional, right? Real, imagined, intentional, and unintentional. So you have, in this situation, where it could be something such as disrespect being shown. It could be imagined disrespect. It could be a real disrespect. It could be unintentional disrespect. Sometimes people do or say things to or around people, and they have no idea what that person's personality, what their background is, what they might have gone through in life, or the experiences that they've had, or they might be currently going through, and they could say something that is very disrespectful, very hurtful to that person, okay? And in the meantime, the person who feels disrespected is starting to allow these thoughts and those words or those actions start to bubble up and boil up, inside. They're not dealing with it. There's no intervention taking place. They're not talking to anybody and expressing how they feel, or even going to the person who might be said something or did something that they consider disrespectful and say, hey, listen, I don't know if you're aware of this, but, I experienced this not that long ago, and the thing that you said, I took it disrespectfully. It wasn't funny, it wasn't a joke, or whatever the situation might be. But instead, they just allow those type of things to bubble and boil and fester in their mind and get them all heated. And it leads to this point here of being unforgiving and revengeful. So it says an unforgiving attitude causes the person to focus on emotional pain that results from real or imagined wrong. A lack of forgiveness leads to anger, hate, and bitterness. And I don't know if you've ever been around people who they're bitter. They just, I've known a few people over the years who it seems like, and I think I've expressed this before, they're always walking around with like a dark cloud over their head. And it's not a means of judging them, but it's just, this is the what they put off, the vibe, so to speak, that they put off. And you might try to have a conversation with them, maybe befriend them or make them feel welcome or a part of the group or environment, and they just don't want to have anything to do with it. Most of the things they say, when they do say something, it's in a pessimistic type tone. They're short, they're snappy with people, and we don't know. We have no idea what that person might be dealing with. That could be some type of very traumatic thing, and maybe they just don't know how to deal with those emotions. But these things are a real occurrence, a daily occurrence with people all over the world. A revengeful person stores hurt feelings and seeks an opportunity to strike back and inflict pain and suffering on the offender. When people take revenge, they risk hurting others as well, not only the person they are targeting, but also those who are not directly involved. And you see this in many times. We've brought out some of the occurrences in some of the previous news articles from the lessons that we covered in the intermediate series, but just things like, for example, drive-by shootings, right? Drive-by shootings that take place in a lot of urban neighborhoods. I guess they might take place rurally. I've never heard of many drive-by shootings taking place out in the country, but I suppose that they can. But what they are acts of retaliation, and sometimes it's gang-related, whatever the case might be. A lot of times it is. Sometimes it's just an act of retaliation for something that took place with somebody else. Maybe somebody else was in another neighborhood and maybe they disrespected somebody. Maybe it was not even an act of violence. It was just something that was said, or they didn't do something. They shouldn't have been over here. Maybe we're in these colors. There's a lot of situations where gangs are still an issue in certain cities, larger cities. So what they do is the other party comes through. They find out where the person is, possibly where they live or where they hang out, and then they just drive by in an attempt to shoot that person. But a lot of times they're in such a hurry, they're just randomly shooting. And there's been numerous articles that have come out, news reports that have come out, how innocent people, a lot of times children, in their own home, the safety, which home should be kind of like a sanctuary, a place of safety, or maybe even sitting on their own porch, just enjoying an evening with their family. As the day draws to an end and it starts to cool off, and here comes a vehicle, shooting, and they become an innocent victim. Sometimes it's a fatal occurrence. Sometimes it's a wounding. Sometimes it's a permanent injury that a person has to live with, where now they're incapacitated and they can't function as they previously did. So this is what it's talking about. You put others at risk. Not only the person that's being targeted. Why? Because of this unforgiving, revengeful attitude, character trait, which, again, when there's no intervention that takes place, well, these things can, of course, lead to disaster. So before I get into the little article here, let's look at the scenario here, because this is something that you would either read, you could pick some volunteers to read, or you could dramatize it in your presentation. So in this scenario, it says, Justin made Billy's life miserable. Billy was short for his age, wore glasses, and was about 30 pounds overweight. Not one day went by that Justin did not push Billy or fail to remind him that he was a fat geek. Instead of asking his parents, teachers, or guidance counselor for ways to deal with the situation, Billy stored his anger and resentment. Eventually, Billy began to plan ways to get even with Justin. He began to plan ways to get even with Justin. And we actually have a video in the Peaceful Solution. I don't have it this evening. Hopefully I can, we probably will be able to bring it up in another class, but that was presented by, actually done by some of the students of the Peaceful Solution in Laredo, Texas, that displayed this this scenario right here, acted out. And it was a pretty well put together by those students video. We played it many, many hundreds of times for students on many presentations, including here as well. So it says here, if Billy was to retaliate against Justin, what could be some of the possible consequences? Now, you take as many answers as you possibly can in the reasonable amount of time. But it says here something that could be mentioned in those answers would be Billy could bring a weapon to school to scare Justin, or he could actually use the weapon at school, in which case Billy would put the lives of many people in jeopardy, especially if it was something like a firearm or some type of explosive device or something like that. His choice would lead to imprisonment sentence, to a prison sentence for the rest of his life. Could, depending on the extent of the crime or how great the damage was done. And see here, and this is a part of the problem here, because even when you think about the Columbine situation that occurred in the 90s, in a lot of, I won't say a lot, but in many cases, like this situation, the scenario that we're covering here, Billy didn't talk to his parents, teachers, or guidance counselors. He stored this anger and resentment, and he started to think in his mind how he could deal with it. Well, a child is ill-equipped, right, with the knowledge, the resources, the skills, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, and so forth, to bring about a peaceful solution. Well, they haven't been taught anything to help them to bring about a peaceful solution. When you take into consideration, the many different influences and the examples that are presented to young people on an everyday basis, just from what they see on media, on billboards, in their environment when they're going to and from school, on movies, on the radio, the type of music that they're listening to, it actually supports these thoughts that Billy is having towards Justin. It's teaching him, hey, go ahead, get even. That's what he says here. He began to plan ways to get even with Justin. Now, when you think about something like this on a scale, a small scale between Billy and Justin, what occurs when you're in a situation where these young men, either from the standpoint of a bully or a person who is being bullied and don't know how to deal with these emotions in a positive way, what occurs when they get older? Well, we see many situations take place on the news. You can just turn on pretty much any news outlet and you probably will see a few positive articles come out, but most of what you see is the negative things, the wars, how bad the economy is, crime and violence taking place. As they used to say back in the day with newspapers, if it bleeds, it leads. We're putting that on the front page. We don't want to put about how, Miss Betty, won the garden contest 5 years in a row for her very fat begonias, and how they were the biggest in all the neighborhood, or begonias or whatever you call them, Nobody wants to read about that, People like reading about, oh man, this 18-car pile up, and there was parts all over the place, I mean, they, are there pictures? Can we see pictures? Is there any pictures in here? People become so desensitized to, humanity and humane ways of living that, they are looking for, that bleeding, leading newspaper articles. Well, there's newspapers anymore, headline articles to catch their attention, to keep them engaged. Well, just as an example, on an international scale, in dealing with retaliation, unforgiving, and revenge, just a few headlines that I pulled up right before class. It says, Iran vows retaliation on Israel after commanders' deaths. raising fears of war spiraling. And that's from NBCnews.com, and that was from 4/2/2024 of this year. Another headline reads, U.S. warns of further retaliation if Iran-backed militias continue their attack. And that was from AP News from 2/4/24. And then here's another one that's not on a national scale, but these are things that you see when you when you look and scale down into smaller things. This was from a California prisoner. This is from EastBayTimes.com. This was just a few days ago. This was put out, 8/29/24. California prisoner reportedly injured by corrections officers days after filing retaliation lawsuit over Aryan Brotherhood prosecution. And so here is a retaliation lawsuit, and then he's retaliated on, right? And these are the types of things that take place on an everyday basis, not only in prisons, but also between countries. You see it taking place between states. You see it taking place between sports teams. You see it taking place between fans of sport teams. But when these emotions, these character traits aren't dealt with in a positive way, then they can lead, as we see the first article we talked about, Iran and Israel. There's many deaths that are taking place in those areas right now, every day. People who have nothing to do with the fighting are losing their lives, being displaced out of their homes. Remember what we said? When people take revenge, they risk hurting others as well. Not only the person they are targeting, but those who are not directly involved. In many of these situations, especially when you look at Israel and what's taking place in the Gaza and what's with Iran, and there's been many other situations in the Middle East there. The people that were responsible, if they actually caught them, a lot of times they're long gone. They're already deceased, but they're still fighting. There's still retaliation that's taking place. Who's taking the brunt of that? The civilians. They're taking the biggest hit of it, And so these are the things that are not considered when unforgiving and revengeful character traits take place. If we can look at slide number 3, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this gentleman here. Not that one. That's 4. 3. There we go. Anybody know who that is? Have you ever seen his face before? It's from a while ago. It's like from the 80s. But this guy's name is Leon Gary Plosh. I had to look up how to spell his name. It kind of looks like a French name, but his name is Leon Gary Plosh. And the next man who was on the next slide there, his name is Jeffrey Doucette. Jeffrey Doucette. All right. What do these two have to do with each other? If you look at that next slide there, Leon is the guy in the background by the payphones, and the man in the foreground is Jeffrey Doucette. And I'll read you here out of what occurred and what took place, because this was actually captured on live television back in 1984. The first gentleman, Leon Plosh, he's an American man known publicly for killing Jeffrey Doucette, who was a child molester who had kidnapped and raped Plosh's son. I won't give the name, it's public knowledge, but just the guy's, he's much older now. Plosh shot and killed Doucette as he was being escorted through an airport by law enforcement to face trial for what he had done to Plosh's son. The killing occurred on March 16, 1984, and was captured on camera by a local news crew. Plosh was given a 7-year suspended sentence with 5 years probation, more than 300 hours of community service, and receiving no prison time. Now, of course, this case received, a lot of publicity because, it was a concern on the law. Hey, this guy, actually, he murdered a guy. How does the law apply to him in this situation? And it says here, when he was questioned, that is, the father was questioned as to why he shot Doucette, he contended that he was in the right for murdering Doucette for abusing his son and that any parent in any similar position would have taken the same action, stating, if somebody did it to your kid, you'd do it too. Now, on March 1st, Jody, or well, that's the boy's name, he was returned to his family in Louisiana. Let's see here. When the father heard of everything that the man had did to his child during the time period of his kidnapping, he said he felt a sense of helplessness and did not know how to deal with the situation. That's what the father said. He said he felt a sense of great helplessness and he didn't know how to deal with the situation. Well, it reminds me of what Billy was going through on a different scale. You know, Billy didn't know how to deal with the situation. And I'm sure that he probably felt helpless in his situation and being bullied by Justin. Well, what was Billy's response? What was the answer to Billy? He figured out a way to get even with Justin. Well, these are adults. Mr. Plosh figured out a way to get even with this perpetrator who violated his son. So anyway, you know, this guy was, he was reunited with his son on the 1st, just to give you a timeline. His son was returned to him on the 1st, and on the 16th, 15 days later, when he was flown back, you know, you can, in that picture, he kind of disguised himself in that airport so that nobody would know who he was. This was pretty thought out and well planned. It says he arrived at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport and was led in handcuffs by police officers through the airport around 9:30 p.m. The father, of course, was waiting for him. News crews were there rolling, and they actually caught him on I don't know if it was live television. I thought it was live television, when he basically shot the man point blank while he was restrained and being escorted to jail, to prison, to jail. The officers who grabbed hold of Plosh recognized him after they got a hold of him. They kept him pinned against the bank of telephones, asking him, "Gary, why? Why, Gary?" Well, the incident, of course, was captured on video, and Dosset, the perpetrator, fell into a coma and died from his gunshot wound the next day. That right there is an example of, you know, a situation when there's no one to intervene that can lead to a disaster, you know. And a lot of people felt that, you know, well, the father was justified for what he did. You know, he violated his son. You know, that man got what he deserved, right? But, you know, of course, you know, none of these things are ever considered acceptable or okay or something we should brush aside. But as we learned in the character unit, many abusers were once abused themselves, and they become a product of their environment. So what that man did was not right, but what he did was probably something that he was taught to do, you know, and he didn't control himself. He didn't make right choices, but again, was he educated to do so, right? And this is why education is so necessary. It's so important because of course we can't ask him now, but whatever led to him making those decisions negatively affected someone else. And that rippled outward and negatively affected other people, the child's parents and family members and so forth. And then the father did something that went out and negatively rippled out and affected others as well, you know, including himself. Sadly, that man, he died not very long ago. Well, I guess it was a while ago. You know, he died from a stroke. But this whole idea of getting even, if you look at the next slide there, how many of you have heard that statement? Don't get even, get mad. Don't get even, get mad. You'd be surprised where that was not really coined, but that phrase became popular. Does anybody have any idea from whose lips it became popular? No? Nobody? Okay, all right. Let's look at the next slide. You might recognize this gentleman as our 35th president of the United States of America, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And it was a phrase that he used in an interview with journalist Ben Bradley. And it was later published in 1975 as part of Conversations with Kennedy series. And that's one of the things that he said, well, don't get even, get mad. And only reason I say that is because, John Kennedy, he wasn't an evil man. He wasn't any different than anybody else, that was probably taught, hey, you stand up and you fight for yourself. You put up your dukes. You don't let anybody take advantage of you. A lot of children have heard those things when they were growing up. Don't be a pansy. Don't let people walk all over you. Very few people, like the author, was told, hey, two wrongs don't make a right. Turn the other cheek, or whatever the case might be. But when people look up to somebody who's a leader in that position and they hear those words, right, it can incite an attitude of unforgiving and revengeful. We saw something pretty similar to that not that long ago, January 6th at the Capitol. Words are very popular, are very powerful if they're not used to motivate people in a positive way. So let's look at the next trait there. Number 2, disrespectful. There are many ways that people are disrespectful to each other in our society. One common form of disrespect is through disobedience to authority figures. Disobedience is to willfully oppose what has been deemed proper and acceptable. This could be in regards to speech, dress, attitude, and behavior. Now, of course, for the most part, you're going to be dealing with, young men and women who you'll be teaching between the ages of, 14 to 18, 13 to 17, somewhere around in there. It kind of varies depending on, when they enter into school, but in the high school. And so this could be in regards to speech, dress, attitude, and behavior. And you see a lot of these things in the schools, where schools have gone so far as to instill or reinstitute dress codes when it comes to dress. Some schools have uniforms that they require that their students wear. Why? Because they find that sometimes students they'll get a little too loose with their clothing, and sometimes that'll start to cause problems in the classroom. It'll cause distractions amongst the students and so forth. And so they say, hey, you have to wear a certain pair of color and type of bottoms, slacks for the young men, maybe a skirt or a dress for the girls, and a certain top, in order to kind of create a uniformity in dress so that there's not those distractions. Well, sometimes students will come and they'll just blatantly oppose the dress code, right? You can't control me. You can't make me wear, this or that. It's my body. I can dress however I want to. Well, not at school you can't. When you come to school, you have to follow those rules. Just like stores have the right to refuse service, at their discretion. And many stores, they don't do it anymore. Well, some stores might, some smaller pop type stores might. But, it used to be no shirt, no shoes, no service. You have to come into the store dressed appropriately, right? Heavens forbid, you go into a grocery store and somebody knocks over a glass of, ketchup. Well, I don't know if they still sell ketchup in glasses. That's what it used to be, and it breaks on the floor, and here you're walking in your bare feet and you step on a piece of glass. What's the first thing most people are going to want to do? They're going to want to sue the store. How dare you put some glass on the floor? Well, no, you can't come in here with no shoes. You have to dress appropriately in order to be in our establishment. But notice here, this disobedience is to willfully oppose what has been deemed proper and acceptable. And our next slide there is just kind of a picture to go behind what this next article is, because we brought this out. I think I read an article once about the teachers, right? The teachers are stressed out. In many cases they are quitting because the thing that they love to do, the very thing that they spent all these years in all this college and all this money going to college, to train for, the environment is making them not want to even be there. When you go to school to teach children, and school, now when I was growing up, people generally respected the teachers. Now there were a few bad apples, as there are in any situation you go in, but teachers were highly regarded, when we were in school. If you came into the classroom and it was first part of the day, or you're coming back from the lunch break, and the children were being a little bit rowdy or whatever, once the teacher walked in, the door closed, everybody got their mouth, sat down at their desk, closed their mouths, and they paid attention. Nowadays, teachers can walk in and they're going to turn up the music on their iPod or whatever, and they're going to be sitting on their desk and talking to each other and doing all kinds of stuff. They don't even pay any attention to teachers. And we've even seen a couple of videos that we played a few times showing that was broadcast on the news how some students and teachers were getting into actual hand-to-hand combat, right? Because one felt disrespected, and sadly the teacher hadn't been taught the peaceful solution. He retaliated, right? Or she retaliated and struck out at the student. So these are the situations that occur when no one intervenes, or at least one person isn't willing to practice the peaceful solution. This is an article from the United Arab Emirates where teachers open up about being bullied by students. And this simply says a kindergarten teacher, her name was changed to hide her anonymity, Ruth, belongs to a rare breed of people who truly love their job. The Fujairah resident has spent most of her career working with young children who bring her joy. When a lesson is going well, it's such an amazing feeling to see that little light of understanding switch on in the student's eye, she says, while talking about what draws her to the profession. But it wasn't always so picture perfect, though. During her previous stint at an international school, Ruth says that she was slapped, kicked, pinched, called names, and had chairs thrown at her by students. She, like all teachers featured in this article, agreed to share their experience on the condition of total anonymity here we go. Total anonymity as she continues to work in the profession, and notice here, fears retribution. She fears retribution. She fears being retaliated against because she's speaking out about some of the things that she's experienced while going to work to actually help other people. It's a universal problem that calls for urgent rectification. In a 2019 article in The Conversation declared that almost every Australian teacher has been bullied by students or their parents, which makes it even worse because what occurs when the teacher wants to speak to the parents, you remember PTAs, parent-teacher association, parent-teacher conferences where, every quarter or so, I was actually pretty glad that my mom, she worked and she couldn't make those things. I didn't want her to get the report about what I was acting up in class, But if she got a report from me, oh yeah, I was doing really great. Oh yeah, you guarantee it. Right? Just don't come to the parent-teacher conference, Mom. You just rest at home, Want me to make you a nice cup of tea or something, I find all types of things to do for Mom so she didn't go to those conferences. But imagine being a teacher dealing with a student who's difficult or who's disobedient. You call the parent in to explain what's taking place in hopes. Now, it used to be you get support from the parents. The child is doing this, is being disruptive. My child's being disruptive? Oh, no, we don't tolerate that. How? You're being disruptive? Explain to me why you're being disruptive. And there'll be a huge conversation right there with the parent and the child. The parent on the teacher side saying, no, when you go to school, you go to learn, not to act a fool, right? You need to sit down, pay attention, get your lessons, and pass your classes, right? Nowadays, it's, my child, it must be your teaching skills. Maybe if you knew how to teach the child, they wouldn't be getting so bored and have to distract themselves. These are the types of things that teachers literally have to deal with. Imagine the frustration that they're dealing with in expecting support from a mature adult, who has a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old student in their class, only to be accused of being a part of the problem, right? Very frustrating. In the United States and even Taiwan and Finland, where teachers were traditionally, I skipped a part. Almost every Australian teacher has been bullied by students or their parents, and that similar cases have been recorded in New Zealand, the United States, and even Taiwan and Finland, where teachers are traditionally well respected. Last year, South Korea even passed a law to protect teachers from bullying parents after a school teacher died by suicide. Dr. Paul Gelston, a clinical psychologist at Dubai Community Health Center, explains that from a psychological perspective, bullying is deliberate, aggressive behavior intended to cause distress to someone. In that sense, it has a more personal motivation to directly attack the specific person, he explains. But in my experience, I don't see that very often in classes here. What I would see more within my line of work is difficult or challenging behavior that disrupts lessons or challenges the teachers in a way, but isn't directly personal towards them. Well, I would suspect that doctor is probably not experiencing or seeing firsthand the things that this teacher in this article is dealing with on a regular basis. Otherwise, he might change his tone, and which is probably a part of the reason why she also wanted to speak on anonymity, because there's probably a perception that, hey, this doesn't take place. So in regards to that disrespectful behavior, look at the scenario below. Valerie was failing her classes because she was not turning in her homework on time. Her parents told her that she would not be allowed to go out with friends until she had made up the work she had missed. Valerie argued and yelled at her parents, telling them that they were unfair. Later that evening, Valerie left the house without her parents' knowledge or permission. Well, what consequences could Valerie's choice lead to? Of course, going out alone at night, especially without a parent's knowledge and permission, could result in several consequences. One, she could get grounded, and she could lose the trust of her parents. Two, she could be kidnapped, raped, or murdered. Nowadays, she could, be offered a drink. That could lead to any of those scenarios. And take those scenarios out of the equation. She could be offered a drink or offered to smoke something, and she could actually overdose as a result of it. Nowadays, marijuana isn't just marijuana. These little pills they give you aren't just these little pills. They're a lot of times laced with fentanyl and other very, very powerful synthetic narcotics, or opioids, right? And many young people on their very, very, very first time of just trying just one hit of something, they can go into an overdose situation because it's more than what meets the eye in that cigarette or pill or drink or whatever it is that they're offered. I remember growing up and my parents telling me, don't just take anything that someone offers you, whether it's a drink or whatever. First off, you don't know what type of germs they have. Where have their fingers been? People dig their nose and pull things out of different places all the time, right? And they're offering something to you. You ever see how people grab a cup or a glass and they're holding it at the top like this? That's like one of the most gross things. Somebody hands you a glass at the very top and you're thinking, man, I sure hope their hands are clean, man. Oh wait, I didn't order the hair with this drink, but people don't think about that. And because they're out, they're having a great time, they're partying, right? Valerie thought, I want to get out and I want to have fun with my friends. Well, if they were truly her friends, they would have motivated her, encouraged her to do the right thing. Now, I know that sounds boring, do the right thing, what's the big deal, sneaking out and going and hanging out with my friends. She might not have even gotten to hang out with her friends. What if she was on the second story and she snuck out and slipped off the roof and fell and broke her neck or something like that and was laying outside? Who knows? I mean, many things can occur when people are doing things outside of the protection of following instructions. Yes, there is protection with following instructions, and a lot of times young people don't think about that. They look at rules, instructions, boundaries, guidelines as an oppressive thing that parents and teachers put down upon them just so that they can't enjoy life. No, our goal is to get you to be able to enjoy life, but to be able to enjoy it with a mind that can make rational decisions and discern between what's right and what's wrong, and avoid those negative things, those negative influences, those negative choices, so that you can enjoy and have a healthy and an enjoyable long life. But sometimes it takes, sadly, experience to learn that. Remember, experience is not the best teacher. It's not always the best teacher. But some people, their heads are so hard, you got to use that experienced sledgehammer to crack it, so to speak, metaphorically, to get them to understand. But they typically bring it upon themselves. Then lastly, there on page 27, number 3, it says, irresponsible and untrustworthy. Irresponsible people often do not fulfill their obligations or duties, nor do they accept accountability for their actions. As a result, an irresponsible person is also untrustworthy. It is difficult to trust someone when they leave their duties unfinished or do them poorly, right? They might have finished them, but they did them poorly. It's like an old saying, lipstick or not lipstick, bubble gum and duct tape, right? I understand sometimes in a pinch, that's all you got. You got to kind of MacGyver it and put it together with bubble gum and duct tape. But when somebody is actually, for instance, someone takes someone or calls someone who is a professional to come and to do their job, whatever that might be, maybe it's building something, adding something on to a housing structure, or fixing something on a vehicle, or fixing a tool or something like that, you would expect that the person is going to do it to the best of their ability and up to whatever standards that they operate under. I've been in houses many times, and you go into a place like a closet, and sometimes closets are pretty small, but when a person is buying a house, they're buying a house to be finished out completely, right? And you go into that closet and you kind of look at that back wall and you're like, wow, they didn't put any texture back there. They didn't do the joints, that they didn't even put a piece of baseboard trim on the inside of the closet, And sometimes the excuse has been said, nobody's ever going to see that. Nobody, it's just a closet, man. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? You're paying to build a house and trim out a closet, right? Now if you left it out and that was a part of the agreement, hey, don't worry about the closets, that's a little bit different, right? Imagine being on the plane and you got the guy who is the most irresponsible mechanic just did a once-over on your aircraft. Yeah, it's got a nose, got some tires, couple wings, engines. Looks great to me. You're ready to take off. 35,000 feet in the air. Should make it safe. Well, I hope you make it. Well, if you don't, just give us a call. We'll walk you through how to fix it at 35,000 feet in the air. No, you want someone who's going to be 100% diligent in doing their job to the best of their ability. And if there's something they don't know how to do, or if there's something they're unsure of, they're not just going to brush it off. They're going to call someone and ask someone, hey, I'm noticing this in this area. I've seen many documentaries on airplane disasters, where one thing was ignored. One thing was ignored. It was known about, but it was kind of ignored put off until later. That caused a tragic, disaster for an airline, and many people lost their lives, and it's very important, when we do see things, to not just make note of it, but let the proper authority know so that it could be dealt with, because in many cases, as we're going to see here in a little bit, sometimes people can suffer harm or their lives lost as a result. But let's look at this scenario first. It says Michael was asked to look after his 6-year-old brother. After his parents left, Michael's friend called him and invited him to the mall. I'm babysitting, Michael responded, but after thinking about it, he said, but I could bring him along. While at the mall, Michael and his friends were having so much fun that Michael soon forgot all about his little brother. When it came time to go home, his brother was nowhere to be found. Now, you know, this has occurred many times. Sometimes the person is found safely. Sometimes they're in the security office at the mall. Sometimes people take advantage of those situations, knowing that the young people that they're with aren't paying any attention to them at all, right? Well, what could be the consequences? What consequences could Michael's irresponsible choice lead to? Well, one is because Michael valued hanging out with his friend more than fulfilling his responsibilities and obligations, his choice endangered his brother's life. His brother could be kidnapped, molested, or even murdered. Well, that ties us back into the first scenario and the article that we covered there. Now, this wasn't a result of an irresponsibility on the parents' part, but these are things that take place on a daily basis. And then you take the whole ripple effect of how that would affect Michael and his family and the community and all the resources that are required from law enforcement and search and rescue and the TV advertisements and saying, have you seen this person, and so forth. I mean, there's a lot that goes into just one person being irresponsible. First off, did Michael even get permission from his parents to take his little brother to the mall? Mom, Dad, hey, such and such is calling me. Is it okay if I take, my little brother to the mall with me? And they might have said yes. Yeah, on the condition that you pay attention and keep an eye on your brother. Don't let him out of your sight, not once, right? So there are many things that can take place. And think about this, when it's an irresponsible scenario, when a person like, say Michael, becomes older. If you look at the next slide there, I didn't know this. Of course, I don't look for it, but it's kind of interesting. You see some of the pictures there. Those are kind of like a search and rescue of looking for people because buildings collapsed. I think one of those was an office building, another one might have been an apartment building. But the article here says, a building has collapsed in Nigeria's mega city, Lagos, once every 2 weeks on average so far this year. Once every 2 weeks, a building is collapsing. Whereas the commercial costs can be calculated, a figure can never be put on the value of the loss of lives lost underneath the rubble. The gaps among the buildings replaced by piles of debris represent a failure of governance, as well as giving rise to allegations of contractors trying to cut corners to save money. Being irresponsible, if these allegations are true, in their duties of making sure that the buildings, the structures that they're building, are going to be safe for its occupants. There are regulations, there are maintenance schedules, there are inspectors, but the system doesn't work. Those responsible are never held to account, so nothing ever changes. Lagos, dubbed by one expert who spoke to BBC as the building collapse capital of Nigeria, has seen at least 90 buildings falling down in the last 12 years, leaving more than 350 people dead, according to the Council for the Regulation of Engineering in Nigeria. One of the most notorious incidents was in 2021. Sunday Femi was just meters away in the upmarket suburbs of Ikoyi, any of our Lagos, excuse me for butchering that, students, when a 21-story block of luxury flats under construction collapsed killing 42 people. Now, that's on a large scale. People who are responsible for building and following certain building standards, if they do cut corners and eliminate something, maybe it's rebar, or maybe we can get this concrete a little bit cheaper, or we might not need this beam or this post or this pillar, right? Over a period of time, that's going to come back and that's going to bite you. 90 building collapses in 12 years. One, as the article said, every 2 weeks this year alone. One every two. Now, there would be a huge outcry, as there is there, but here in the United States, we have certain building standards and building codes. We have OSHA and we have, code enforcement agencies and so forth. I'm working on the job right now. It's about 50,000 square feet that got put off for a whole month because the concrete slab did not pass the concrete inspection. Now, what all is involved in that, I have no idea, which means that the concrete contractor had to re-pour a cap of 50,000 square feet on top of that slab. Someone ate that cost, So I'm thankful that there's such stipulations in the building codes, because imagine going into a house or into a building or into a structure worrying about, is it going to fall? Is it going to collapse? Because the standards are not up to par, right? And that's one of the things about building codes when it comes to electrical codes, plumbing codes, framing codes, structure codes, fire codes, all those things. The main goal is to protect the occupants and the integrity and safety of the structure, right? Because it's not just the occupants in the building. When the building collapses, that rubble spreads out all around that building, and it causes damage to other structures and potentially other people as well. So these things are important, and so we can see on a small scale, with the scenarios that are given, but also a larger scale with events that take place just in everyday lives between countries, communities, a father to his son's perpetrator and so forth. When these things get out of control, when there's unforgiveness, these character traits of unforgiving and revengeful, disrespect, irresponsible, and untrustworthy, when someone doesn't intervene, yes, disaster can strike, and it can be fatal, and it can have lasting consequences. Well, we're going to stop right there. And we're going to pick up next class on page 28. Now, for those of you who are watching, our next class is going to be postponed from the 4th. Okay, so we're not going to be having a class this coming Wednesday, the 4th. It'll be pushed back to the following Sunday, the 8th. So stay tuned or tune in next Sunday, 6 days later, the 8th, for the continuation of this class. And we hope to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.